Hello, and welcome to the show Goldsquadrongays. It's the podcast where two Star Wars loving gays break down each episode of their favorite Star Wars TV shows while also being gay as hell. I'm your host, Bradley Brower.
And I'm Charles Rogers, and we're back with just the two of us.
Just after the two of us. I don't know the words.
I don't either. I was going to start singing, but I don't know.
I would keep going, but we'd have to pay money to play that song, so I don't want to do that.
That's true. I do not want to pay any money.
Exactly.
We don't make enough from this podcast to afford any licensing
to afford
fees.
A single song.
You'll notice that we don't use the Star Wars things because we're a little paranoid about that. Bradley, do we have any news this week? I literally am just realizing we had an hour-long pre-meeting. And I forgot to ask, do we have any news this week?
No. Maybe? No?
I don't think so. I vaguely glanced at headlines before we started. Mostly stuff we already knew. Mandalorian season 3 has started filming.
Okay. Yeah, I'm looking at This Week in Star Wars. I don't see anything weird.
Well, if we don't have really any news this week, Bradley, before we jump into the episode, I don't have the thing Charles fucked up. What I have is the thing Charles said on our last Mandalorian episode that he would double check. And I have. On our episode with Kyle, do you remember we were talking about astrology?
Yes.
And we were making astrology jokes. And we were asking, is astrology a thing in the Star Wars universe? Well, I can confirm, Bradley, after 3 minutes of Googling, that it is.
Ooh.
And we know this because of a throwaway line in Leia, Princess of Alderaan, is that a very young Vice Admiral Holdo is super into astrology.
Oh,
that is all we know about astrology. It's a thing, and Holdo was super into it as a preteen / teenager.
Damn, I thought you were about to tell me hey, you were born under the Porg Rising, whatever, and I wanted to know what mine was.
No. Yeah, maybe that would be something for a reference book, because that the Star Wars gays would be all over that.
Oh, 100%.
We would be absolutely all over that. I would put it on my dating app. Well, I guess not dating app nowadays, but the thing you actually use dating apps for bios, just to see what happened. It would be great. We would go nuts over that.
I know. I'm gonna say, if any artists out there want to create, I'm sure they have already, but if anybody wants to go out there and create a Star Wars zodiac or some kind of, constellation map, so that we have some fun thing to be hey, I'm not a Cancer, but I'm a Porg.
Well, I was gonna say I might get the artist who does all of our art to do it, but that would either require me to create the thing and explain all of the different animals to her,
right?
Because she doesn't watch Star Wars at all.
No.
Or I would have to do a bunch of work explaining that to her, or she'd have to start watching Star Wars, which is not quite as funny if she knows what she's drawing.
Maybe we could do what if you do Star Wars Western Zodiac, but it's all Star Wars Visions themed. So instead of Gemini, it's the twins. And instead of you know what I mean? You do different little things for each episode.
Oh yeah, because there's 9 of them. You could theoretically let's solicit some listener comments.
Somebody.
DM us on Twitter or Instagram, or email us at goldsquadrongays@gmail.com if you have ideas for a Star Wars astrology thing, and we'll look into doing something with it.
Right.
That was not our thing we fucked up, but the thing that I promised to do more research on. So with that out of the way, right. Bradley, would you like to take us into this pretty decent episode of The Mandalorian?
Yeah, so today we're going to be talking about Season 2, Episode 7, The Believer. This week, the Mandalorian seeks help from an old enemy. What's one thing about this episode you liked and one thing you didn't?
I absolutely, absolutely loved the visuals and the production design on this episode. Everything from the scrap planet resembling Braca and Roxas Prime, which I absolutely love that whole aesthetic, to the kind of Takodana but imperial look of the refinery. Like, I loved that. I thought it was absolutely fantastic. One thing I didn't like, it's a natural consequence, and I'm not sure I'd change anything about it. You know what? No, I would, because here's the thing. I was going to have a note all the way at the end, but I'm going to say it now. The concept art for this episode, specifically the one of Fennec Shand and Cara Dune, which shows them like surrounded by stormtroopers, back to back blasting, is so fucking badass. And then in the episode itself, they have some fun dialogue moments at the beginning and the end, but they mostly just like sit on the ridge and snipe people, which, don't get me wrong, is badass. Mm-hmm. But I also feel like they could have upped the stakes for those two characters a little bit more. Because Boba stays on the ship the whole time, which is fine, because Slave One does get to do something awesome. But I feel like they had maybe planned in the conception phase for these two characters to be a bit more involved than just sniping from the ridge. But for whatever reason, when they made it to the actual episode itself, they were like, well, we need to focus more on Mayfeld and Mando. And so as a result, the other characters got a little bit sidelined. So that would be one thing, maybe not that I disliked, but maybe one thing that could have been for this episode and wasn't. What about you? One thing you liked and one thing you disliked?
Yeah, I kind of agree with you with the dislike. I do think that the quote side characters got sidelined in this episode, but not in a total detriment to the characters. I think that, like, yes, this episode was solely focused supposedly like on that relationship between Mando and Mayfield, so I can't be too mad about it, because they did have some really, really good character moments in this episode, especially with Mando and Mayfield, because Mayfield brought it out to light, you know. So I can't be too mad about that. I will say, yeah, I think if the one thing I would have liked more is if they would have gave us, of course, more Fennec Shand. I think that would have been doable in this episode. There's something, I feel like there's places where they could have bumped her up just slightly more, and then it would have been cool. But one thing I really liked about this episode was actually the flip side of the story. So we have our characters kind of infiltrating the enemy, you know, behind enemy lines, right? And I love seeing the inner workings of the Empire. I love seeing like just everybody who works for the Empire just acting like this is their job, they're normal, like this is fine, like we're not doing anything bad, like this is our, you know, we just doing our job, you know, kind of thing. And I like, you know, going in the cafeteria and eating lunch. Like I like, you know, everybody's cheering for their fellow troopers because they made it out alive after pirates started to attack them. You know what I mean? Like, so I like that.
I've had the distinct displeasure to work for several corporations, and it does remind me a lot of like company culture, looking at the way that the Imperials act and the way everything is set up. It's kind of a military cross with like a company culture type thing, which is interesting to see what one of these bases that's a combination of civilians and Imperials actually looks like.
Yeah, I think it was just so fun because I liked I like how everybody in the Empire is either an asshole or an idiot. Like it's so great.
Well, you gotta think. We made the point all the way back in season 1, episode 3. What type of person is joining the Empire 5 years after the Battle of Jakku? Somebody who's either an idiot or an asshole.
I know, and I love it. It's so much fun. I do wish though. I know that we're kind of still in the throes of the old Empire, so there's not a ton of women around. But I think that's one thing I miss with this episode. I think is that Lady Imperials. I like seeing them because I feel like they're always the best characters. So it just depends on like, because I think is it the comms officer?
It's a comms officer that shows up right at the end. That's like Moff Gideon's
I love
right
her.
hand.
So I think things like that, I want more of that because they're kind of slowly getting into that, I guess, with the First Order, but it's
this is an old school Empire, like original trilogy
right.
era. Yeah, maybe all of them were like competent. So they went off to the unknown regions to found the First
You know
Order.
what? That
Remember,
is a good
these are the
headcanon.
ones. These are the Imperials that got left behind. These are the ones that Gallius Rax was like, yeah, y'all can stay here and die.
You know what? I like the headcanon of all minorities and women and just generally anybody who wasn't an old white man got to go to the First Order and everybody else got left behind.
Or at least the initial institution that devolved into what the First Order would be. Because, yeah, Gallius Rax's thing was the ones who were competent at their job can come form the new empire with me, and the rest of you can stay behind.
Right.
And other than some exceptions, Moff Gideon, it seems like they mostly left the old white men, at least on this base.
Right.
Which ends up biting them in the ass later on in this episode. All right. You want to take us in so we can knock out the details of this in our ridiculously microscopic way that we do?
So our episode begins on the Carton Chop Fields, where our New Republic security droid walks up to Miggs Mayfield, who is serving out his prison sentence. The droid releases Mayfield into the custody of Marshal Cara Cynthia Dune, who has a job for him. After being racist and confusing Boba Fett with Mando, he begrudgingly agrees to help despite not actually getting anything out of this deal.
So did you notice the crane again?
Yes, I did notice the crane again. And I was like, you get a way better shot of it, I think, in this one. Or at least it's more recognizable as the legs in this one.
So I did recognize the crane immediately, but I had to have it pointed out to me later that is actually the ship that's flying overhead is the same type of ship that the prison ship that they break into season 1.
Nice.
And then the prison droid is, I think, the same prison droid.
Yeah, for sure. And the only reason why I noticed that is because when they show him walking, you notice they show the legs first, and the legs look like K2SO's legs. It's like the same body-ish. And so that's why I recognized it instantly. And I was like, oh, that's the same one.
A big theme of Mando and some of the other like stuff set in this era is kind of Empire, New Republic to the guys like totally on the ground, like the lowest of the low people. It doesn't really matter to them.
It's all the same.
It's all the same. Somebody's in charge. Their situation hasn't changed whatsoever. So that being like the K2 legs is just an interesting way of highlighting that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's kind of like if one regime falls, another one takes over. You kind of have to use the same stuff. It's not like it doesn't just like, oh, we have to give a facelift to every single thing we have just so everybody knows we're not Empire. Like, no, that's not how it's going to work. Like, so it makes sense that like, hey, probably these security droids are just recycled droids from the Empire. They're just painted differently or whatever,
Especially if you just fought a damn near 25-year-long insurgency. Mm-hmm. To put yourself in power, yeah, you're gonna have to make do with what you've got.
Right.
Shout out to Boba Fett's painting skills.
Yeah. So can we theorize that at least there's been some kind of not time jump, but enough time has passed where Boba Fett was like, you know what, I'm gonna take the time and just polish myself off, like make myself look really good.
I'm imagining like they're sitting in hyperspace. And they're sitting in those chairs that we see in the scene in the Slave One, and everybody's got a piece of Boba's armor, and they're like sitting. It's Fennec Shan and Din Djarin and Boba Fett, and they're sitting there in complete silence, each painting a piece of Boba Fett's armor with 100%. The spare like wall of a matte painting that he has in the cargo hold of the ship, just in case. They're not saying a word to each other, and it is the best trip that any of them have ever been on.
I like to think that that's true. I feel though a lot of people didn't really like this at first.
It was a bit jarring. Like for me watching the episode, I was like, oh, because I had gotten so used to the like kind of faded armor from the original trilogy, because he didn't do a very good job upkeeping it in the original trilogy. And then we've got the kind of weird, I've been through the Sarlacc armor from episodes 1, 2, and 6. And then suddenly he's like got this beautifully painted armor again. It was a bit jarring.
Yeah. And I think too, it just doesn't, I think the matte, I think they painted it like kind of like in a matte finish. And so it kind of like, it's a weird, almost like they didn't finish the painting. Like you're almost thinking like, why didn't they add a little roughness to it to make it have texture or something? Like it looks too smooth almost.
I think Boba Fett would do an adequate job of painting, of miniature painting, if Boba Fett played Warhammer 40K. But I don't imagine he'll be winning any prizes for it anytime soon.
I also thought that they probably only did this because they just wanted to sell more toys. So you could be like, here's dirty Boba and here's clean Boba.
No, Star Wars is about merchandising. Never thought of that before. That's a question for our nerdy audience is, what group do you think Boba Fett would play if he played Warhammer 40K? Please don't talk to me about Warhammer 40K. You will not like my opinions on it. So here's a question that I had. They said they need Mayfeld, which, side note, is it Mayfeld or Mayfield? Because I say Mayfeld.
I mean, it's spelled Mayfield, but I mean, I don't know if it matters.
We are already getting a reputation as the guys who can't pronounce things properly.
Mayfeld. I think it's Mayfeld. No, that doesn't make sense because that's not how it's spelled. It has to be Mayfield.
Let's do this. I'll keep saying Mayfeld, and you can keep saying Mayfield, and one of us will be right.
Okay, you know what? And then that way, nobody can say anything.
They can only yell at one of us for getting it wrong. So Mayfeld says that they need him for the Imperial procedures and like protocols. Mm-hmm. Here's my question. Does the Empire just never change their protocols? Like they changed them once in Bad Batch.
Right.
When Tech tries to slice in and sets off the alarm because the base in the War Mantle episode has changed the codes. But in Rebels, they're still using codes 15 so years later that Cody and Rex developed. And here, Mayfeld hasn't been an Imperial sharpshooter for at least like 4 or 5 years, probably as long as 8 years, because we'll get into how long Operation Cinder was ago, which if he deserted around Cinder, that was 8 years ago, 9 years ago. Did they not did they not change the protocols at all?
I think that I think on the basis level, like just the base level or whatever, everything is pretty much the same. Like the generic, like this is how we do things, you know. I think like if you went to the Imperial Academy, like that stuff is pretty much the same. And then maybe there's a few things that are different. But I think especially when you're on a secret base that's not supposed to be there, you know, they don't really have time to change to like the most modern kind of tactics or whatever. They're kind of just stuck with their own little circle of people. And so they kind of just kept things the same because why change a broken thing, you know?
I feel like it's a testament to the slow-moving Imperial bureaucracy.
Right.
So I have 2 more notes on this little section. The first is it's very interesting that we actually see that the inside of Slave 1 rotates.
I think everybody's brain just exploded when we saw
mine certainly did. I went, wait, what is are they in the middle of the ship is rotating?
Because the only time we've ever seen the Slave 1 was back in the prequels, and it was
we saw the cockpit.
Right, we saw the cockpit and we saw them. It looks like they're kind of laying back, like it's almost upside down, so it makes sense. And we're like, oh, they have to like climb up a ladder or something to get to it, or like it has to always be awkwardly like upside down or like. And now we get to see that like, oh no, the ship just kind of articulates based on where you need to be.
The inside of the ship like rotates based on where down is supposed to be.
Yeah, I know. It's so odd to think about, but
I want to see a cross section. I didn't look for a cross section of this before we started recording, but I badly need to know how this works. My last note for this sequence. So Bill Burr is really fucking good in this episode. Like, just as an actor, it's very clear from the way he pronounces things. And also, if you have Googled Bill Burr for 5 minutes, you know that he does not give a shit about Star Wars at all. Mm-hmm. But he absolutely brought his A game where it counted in this episode.
For sure. I think it's also a testament to him too, that like, you don't need to be a fan of something to do a good job in the thing that you're in. Like, as long as you're a good actor or you're trying, like, you can do a good job, especially when you have a franchise that is so near and dear to the fanboys' hearts, you know, that you can mess up if you just look at an alien the wrong way in the episode. You know, he did a good job with that. I applaud him for at least trying, you know, especially as a non-fan.
Right. As somebody who's made jokes about how actively hostile he is, to turn around and do such a good job with this episode really is kind of a testament. And we've talked about on previous episodes where we talked about how Giancarlo Esposito clearly thinks that Moff Gideon's first name is Moff. You don't need to be super well versed in a franchise to do a good job of acting in it. And like with Mark Hamill in The Last Jedi, you don't necessarily, at the time that you're filming, need to have a totally positive thoughts on what you're filming to bring your A game to it.
Right.
And in the case of Bill Burr, I will keep my opinions on the man out of Star Wars to myself. But in terms of the context of this particular episode, he did bring his A game where it counted.
Right. Up next, the Mando crew devises a plan to steal an Imperial juggernaut so they can sneak inside the refinery and access an Imperial terminal where they can get the coordinates of Gideon's Starcruiser. But because of plot reasons, Mando and Mayfield are the only ones that can infiltrate the base.
In fairness, I do love the plot reasons. That might be my second favorite scene in the episode. It's really not my favorite, but it may be my second favorite scene in the episode, where they're all going around in a circle. It's like, well, I can't go because I'm a former rebel drop trooper. Well, I can't go because the ISB knows who I am. And they turn to Boba Fett and he's like, yeah, I think they're going to know my face.
Well, that one was a weird line too, right? So that brings up a lot of questions for me, because so what we can argue by this point in the timeline, right? All the clones are either dead or old fucking men. Like, there's no way that they're not like retired by this point because of just the fast aging. You have to argue, like, how many people in the Empire know what a clone looks like?
So it's not necessarily about the people. The reason they give is that the thing is going to scan your face. And if it scans your face and ISB has you in their database and you're not registered as an Imperial, then it's going to flag you.
Right.
Or at least if you're registered as someone who's worked against the Imperials, they're going to flag you. So if they scan his face, the very early stormtroopers, or at least the early Empire, used clone troopers. So they're going to know. Mm-hmm. They're going to know what a clone trooper looks like. The system is going to ping him as a clone.
And then my other question is too, like, out of all of them, the only person who could scan their face then would have to be Mando. Because if Mayfield scans his face, would they not pull up his registration and be like, oh, you were a former whatever and you deserted?
I'm going to guess he's probably listed as KIA or MIA.
Okay.
I'm going to guess that's probably what's going on, is he's listed as KIA or MIA, so he wouldn't be necessarily flagged in the system.
Gotcha.
The way that somebody who's actively hostile to them is going to be flagged in the system. So let's talk about Rhidonium.
Okay.
Do you know where Rhidonium is from, Bradley?
Is it from Rhydon?
So I don't know. I didn't really look at like what Rhidonium actually is in universe.
Oh.
But it was a big part of an early episode of Star Wars Rebels. Mm-hmm. But it didn't actually originate there. It originated in the Clone Wars. And you don't remember that.
No.
Because most people don't remember that. Because the arc in which Rhidonium was first introduced and created the biggest explosion in the series was the D Squad arc. And I can tell from your facial expression in the Zoom call that you don't know what the D Squad arc is.
You got to keep going. Like I'll get it. You just got to connect it for me.
Do you know those 4 fucking episodes with the droids and the tiny little alien that's inside of them, and it's R2, and there's one episode that's literally just them walking around a featureless white void for 20 minutes?
Okay, this is starting to come back to me.
No one watches these episodes on rewatch unless you're absolutely 100% doing a full chronological rewatch. You have no idea what series of episodes I'm talking about. It's just proving my point.
I can see like R2-D2 on some kind of white landscape. I don't know what, like, I don't know what else it would be.
They go to the white landscape and then they find Gregor and he's a dishwasher on this random white planet. And then at one point, like, blows up the ship, but it's a big explosion. Well, trust me, if you've seen Clone Wars, this happened. It was not a fever dream. This was real.
Gotcha.
I love how nobody thinks Bill Burr is funny in this scene. Like, he cracks a joke about Mando's temper, and it's like, everybody looks at him like, what the fuck are you on about?
What's funny too is he kind of gave me, like, in a weird way, he gave me like Han Solo vibes. Like, he kind of like gave me this, he's trying to make light of the situation when he knows it's shitty. Like, he knows that they're in kind of a very like life or death kind of situation, but he's kind of trying to make the best of it because he knows he probably is going to die soon.
The difference is that Han Solo is likable, and Mayfeld is an asshole.
Right. And they all kind of act like that too. They're like, I don't really like this guy.
My final note for this sequence is that I just love hearing Tamura Morrison's voice come out of Boba Fett on screen.
Oh, yes.
I'm just so happy to see that.
I just like him just being there.
I was opposed to Boba Fett, as I explained last week, showing up in this show. I was opposed to bringing him back at all. And now that he's here directly in front of me, you know what it's like, Bradley? It's like when it's 11:30 at night and you've got a grinder date that comes over and he's kind of meh and you're sort of meh on it, but you've had a couple of shots. So you're like, why not? And then he shows up and he's fucking hot as shit. And you're like, oh, your pictures did not do you justice at all. That's how I feel like seeing Boba Fett back.
What reality are you living in where that ever happens? That'll never happen. I have had that happen.
No. I have had that happen. I have had grinder dates where their pictures are like meh, and then they show up and I'm like, oh my God.
No.
What is this?
I disagree with reality that you are presenting.
This is my reality, Bradley. This is the reality that I'm living in. This has happened to me.
Oh my God.
You can't relate because I know where you live, and this hasn't happened to me where you live.
Right.
This has happened other places.
Up next, the plan is enacted as Mando and Mayfield take over a Juggernaut posing as 2 troopers. They drive the Juggernaut to the refinery only to be attacked by pirates. Just as they make it to the refinery, they are saved by Imperials, who help take out the rest of the pirates and unknowingly help them sneak inside the base.
The red piece of armor on Mando's arm might be my favorite piece of production design in this entire series for the Imperials.
Why is that?
Hands down. Have you seen Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark, Bradley?
Oh, you mean the part where Han Solo gets frozen in carbonite and he has a fever dream while he's in carbonite?
Yes. Have you seen that
I've
totally
seen that
Star Wars canon fever dream?
Yeah, that deleted scene that they
yes, that they just turned into a whole movie. Right. So do you remember the scene where they infiltrate the Nazi rally in that in
No.
that movie. Okay, it's probably been a while since you've seen
Yeah,
it.
I haven't seen those movies in a long
I
time.
believe it's Raiders of the Lost Ark. Actually, it might have been Last Crusade.
Hmm.
It's been a while since I've seen the movies, but there's a scene in one of those two movies. I think it's Lost Ark, where it's either, yeah, I'm not 100%. Point is, there's a scene in the Indiana Jones movies where he has to infiltrate a Nazi rally. And the way they get in is they put the red Nazi armband on to
Ah,
sneak in. Because that was the thing that if you look at the SS uniforms and you look at the Nazi uniforms and you look at Nazi Germany, the red armband was a signifier of your allegiance to the Nazi party. And the transport driver having the red kind of arm thing on their transport
right.
is a subtle thing, like calling them stormtroopers. It's a subtle connecting of the empire to real world fascism and Nazi Germany. So when I realized, like, oh, it's the red armband, I was like, oh yeah, the empire are fascists. This would make sense. This is a neat design choice to have that be incorporated into the armor.
Now that you say that, I feel like if I ever had the chance to do some kind of design or make that kind of choice where I would make like the bad guys all have something in common, like I think that'd be a fun like little nod. Like I do like a little red armband or something like.
The empire, yeah, like the empire has these beautiful little nods to, it's the empire specifically. They don't really do it with the First Order,
Right.
but the empire is explicitly directly tied to the Nazis.
Yeah, I was trying to think like there's the what is it? I think it's the stormtrooper captains maybe or something where they have that weird kind of collar that kind of goes onto one shoulder.
The orange plating.
Right. That's kind of vaguely like that.
Yeah, somebody who's more versed in World War II history than me. I'm not really a big World War II guy, mostly because a lot of strange history men, that tends to be their thing. And so anytime someone brings it up, I'm like recoiling away in judgment. But somebody who's more versed in World War II history may be able to point out the only ones that I recognized are the red armor piece that looks like an armband, and then the literal fact that they're called stormtroopers.
Right. And I noticed too, so in these outfits that they're wearing, these particular armor pieces, their helmets, they're not the same as obviously regular stormtroopers. So these are, I mean, these are just pilot helmets.
These are new. So these are some sort of transport crew, which we've never seen before.
Got it.
So these are completely new. Shore troopers show up at the end, which,
right.
Why are they there?
Maybe
is this armor they had on hand? Like, there's no shore.
Right. I was thinking maybe just because jungle like
jungle like there's a lake, but like I didn't really see like a beach to the lake.
I
don't know. It's I do love, talking of the helmets, I do love how Mando is so over Mayfeld's shit, even in the helmet. Like his body language and everything just makes it work. Let's talk about Mayfeld's entire conversation with Mando.
Okay, I was gonna say we could talk about this probably for an hour, but let's
get into it now. This specific conversation for an hour, where everything Mayfeld says is correct.
Everything he says. Also, I love that they had to. Right. I love how they had to in this scene be like, "Oh, I can't wear this because my fucking it's too hot in here, or I can't see anything, or whatever," just to distinguish Mayfeld from Mando the whole entire like scene, so that we knew which one was which.
Well, Mayfeld raises, like, Mayfeld's an asshole. Like, the guy is just a piece of shit. But he raises so many good points during this conversation that it stunned me when I rewatched these episodes. Because the first thing he points out is that whether it's the Empire or the New Republic or whatever, the people who settled the land to whichever group is moving in to exploit it for their own purposes, it does not matter to them whether or not it's a democracy or it's an authoritarian state they're just going to see them as the people who are invading our land and hurting us. And then he brings up the point that he says the bit about Mandalorians believe one thing, Alderaan believes another thing. Neither of them are there anymore. And then he also brings up the point that, like, there's always going to be somebody ruling, and there's always somebody going to be ruled, and the ruled aren't going to be able to really tell the difference. And then he has my favorite exchange, because a big theme of this season has been deprogramming Mando and how he reconciles the challenges to his worldview in the cult with reality. Right. And Mayfeld, for one of the first times in this, directly calls him out on this and points out, your rules seem to change when you get desperate. Because first it's, I can't take this helmet off. And then it's, no, it's fine to wear a different helmet. You just can't see my face.
Right.
And Mando, when you have a direct challenge like that, Mando gets really defensive about it. Mayfeld's right.
And I'm wondering too, like, because when he does specify, he goes, like, he's like, hey, which one of these rules is correct? Because you're not, like, you're not as clear on the rules. Why can't I see your face? Or is it just the helmet is sacred, so don't take off the sacred helmet? But now you can wear some Joe Schmo's helmet, like, to cover your face, because, you know, that's just what it is. You just can't see your face because that's the rules.
Mayfeld is raising the points that we've been making throughout the entire second season watch of this.
Right.
It's like, what is the rules exactly?
And I don't think Mando knows.
In the creed exactly.
I think that's the thing, man. I don't think Mando even knows what it is. I think he's just going based off his ideology being taught as a child, like, just don't take off the helmet. So his thought process is, you know, the rule is don't take off the helmet. Well, in this situation, as long as my face isn't showing. Well, we never said you couldn't show your face. We said you couldn't take off the helmet. You know, I don't think he necessarily knows the rules, because there aren't any rules. Like, it's just a weird thing that someone told him one time, and so now he's
adopted it. He's adopted it as gospel, but he doesn't know what he's adopting.
Exactly.
In a season about deprogramming, this is an interesting moment, just because it's that challenge that jams just a massive hole in his entire ideology, to directly challenge and be like, what is the rule? He's all about, I need to follow the rule. I need to follow the rule. Okay, what is the rule? And Mando has no answer. He just gets really defensive, probably because he's not confident in the answer. A couple of minor little notes here. I love the proceed with caution. It has such, like, corporate vibes to it.
Well, I love the voice on the radio the whole entire time. Is really funny, because she's very much like, just keep going, like, it's fine, nothing's wrong. And then, like, they see an explosion, and then it's like, okay, well, transport 2 is done, like, keep going. Oh, transport 3 is gone. All right, nope, maintain your course, like, we just need you guys to get there. Transport 4 is exploded, like, you know what I mean? Like, it's just funny how it keeps going
Transport
down.
4 is exploded. Right. Be on the look for some minor fluctuations on your horizon as this giant explosion is happening. I love the transport running over the guy. Yes, and hearing the crunch. Boop. I was like, oof.
It's kind of rough.
Anybody who's ever accidentally run over, like, a possum or something on the highway, you know this feeling. It's deeply uncomfortable. And then finally, my absolute favorite moment of this entire sequence, because there's not a lot to write home about. It's a good action sequence. Absolute favorite moment, Mando forgetting that he's not wearing Beskar.
He just goes right into the action. He's just kind of like, all right, shoot me, I don't care.
At one point, the guy whacks him and, like, actually throws him off because he's wearing the shitty transport driver armor instead. Like, what were we talking about? There was a previous episode where we were talking about how he was getting complacent with the Beskar. I think it was episode 6 of the first season, where we're talking about how the Beskar will just deflect this shit. So he's changed up his fighting style.
Oh, you know what's funny it may be the prisoner episode.
I think that's what it is.
That's
the
where he was
episode.
running down the hallway, and he was just kind of like, "Well, they can just shoot me because I'm wearing Beskar." Like
he's adopted his fighting style, and then when he has to adopt back, it doesn't really work.
Right, and that's just funny how that those, because we'll talk about why these two episodes connect later with the director. But it's just funny that, yeah, I think that was also the episode that happened, was the prisoner episode. Once inside the base, the pair are cheered and saluted by Imperials. They find their network terminal inside the Imperial cafeteria, but Mayfield recognizes an Imperial in the corner, his old field officer inside, and is afraid of getting caught. Din offers to go instead, but to do so requires the removal of his helmet.
The Empire, the people who are in this base for the Empire are like a bunch of fucking fanatics, and it's genuinely frightening. Like if you read the subtitles of what they're actually like shouting, they're shouting saying, like, yeah, glory to the Empire,
yeah,
and things, and I'm like,
yikes.
No,
it's funny too listening to them, because they're like, oh my god, I can't believe they did that, like that's great, like it's weird listening to the things that they say, because I did have the subtitles up and I was reading them and I was like, those lucky extras got their little lines in.
Yeah, I was listening, I was like, knowing that the guys that are left behind here are not the First Order, we don't know a whole lot. So it's I theorize that Gideon is working for Thrawn, but it's also possible that Gideon is working for the First Order, or Gideon is working directly for Palpatine. Something might be going on there. We can reasonably assume, though, that these guys are not First Order. That they're just super into the Empire 9 years later. That is an uncomfortable thing to see. It's like, you're still all about this. Why? It's either because you're an idiot or you're a bully.
Yeah, they're also kind of like fanboys, and
yeah,
it's weird. Like they're almost like fans of the Empire. Like they saw everything that went down, and then once the Emperor died, they were kind of like, you know what? I kind of want to take up the cause. Like I feel bad that happened. Like I'm gonna join the Empire now that the Empire, the Emperor's dead. Like I'm gonna, get back in there and help when I can.
Well, the Empire's thing is that they're like, oh, we're bringing stability. Mm-hmm. So that's their sales pitch, is they're bringing stability. And if you look at the Empire of this era, they're recruiting people by saying they are looking for people who are saying, like, well, the New Republic took over and everything's in chaos. The New Republic doesn't have the military. They don't have the reach. They don't know what they're doing. Man, I sure miss when the Empire was in charge.
Right.
Everything was oppressive, but at least it was stable. And it didn't affect me personally.
Right.
Which is an extremely frightening thing that actually happens in the real world.
Constantly.
So to see it here, even at the tiny, like, throwaway lines, that if you just watch the episode and you're like, oh, they're cheering for them, it's still a kind of a weird scene. But if you listen to what they're saying and how invested in the Empire they are, it makes it that much more uncomfortable. So Pedro Pascal has to take his helmet off.
Yeah. So this was a big deal in the terms of not only the character, but in terms of, like, we've only seen Pedro Pascal with his helmet off the one time. So up until this point. And we're like, whoa, we get Daddy Pascal for a whole, like a whole, like, minute and a half of his face.
I would say this is the moment where the deprogramming reaches something very close to a pinnacle. We will get the final abandonment of his fanatical beliefs in the next episode. But I would argue that this is the moment that cemented that, when he takes the helmet off here.
Right.
Because he's presented with a choice, the essential choice for this character. You leave the helmet on, and you lose the child. Or you take the helmet off and you maybe get the child back. He doesn't have a lot of time to consider. It's almost a gut reaction. Watching it back, there's no hesitation. It almost seems like he knows from the moment he says, give me the stick, what he's going to have to do.
Right.
And he leaves the helmet on as long as possible. But the second they're like, you got to take it off, it's off.
You got to just go with it. I like how there is a sense of urgency too, because he leaves it on for that 1 second and it scans his face with the helmet on for 1 second. And then it's like error. And then that's when, the guy in the corner kind of like goes, oh, something's going on over there. And then he has to like take it off real quick and then scan his face. And it's just like, I don't know. I feel like he had to do it in that exact moment. Otherwise it was done.
Part of the tragedy of the episode and part of the sheer genius of it is if he had just taken the helmet off before it scanned,
right,
the guy wouldn't have noticed him.
Exactly.
The guy wouldn't have paid. Like, he was already kind of looking at him, but he really piqued his interest when the machine started going.
Right.
So he probably would have had enough time to take the helmet off, scan it real fast, and put the helmet back on. Mm-hmm. So even if the guy approached him, he's not looking directly at his face.
Correct.
But because he leaves it on for that extra second, because he has to hold on to his programming just for that extra few seconds, we end up in the situation we end up with in this episode. Also, shout out to Pedro Pascal's eyes. So, like, in addition to being just absolutely gorgeous, which they are, I could stare into them for hours. They're okay. Beautiful. Watch carefully the way his eyes move in this episode.
Okay.
Because the way his eyes move back and forth in this sequence and the next sequence, they are looking around like he is still wearing the mask.
Oh, interesting.
They don't do a lot of like vertical, like they mostly go side to side and up and down. So he's so used to the visor that
interesting.
It doesn't even process in his brain to look a different way. Or he'll turn his whole head. There's sequences later on when they're sitting at the table. He will turn his whole head to look at like Mayfeld, because if he were in the helmet, he would have had to do that. The peripheral doesn't go over far enough for him to do that. Or he's so used to that being his quote unquote face. Like Pedro Pascal's acting in this scene, not only the facial expressions he does of how uncomfortable and conflicted he is, but the way his face, like the way he moves his head and moves his eyes, unbelievable.
Yeah.
Did you guys in your major, because our majors were slightly complicated when we were in school, but as part of mine, I had to take an acting class, multiple acting classes. Did you have to take any acting classes?
No. So the only reason why though was because they didn't offer any at our location, so it wasn't required.
Yeah, when I was doing my first major, we had the performing arts building right there, and so we were required to take a bunch of acting classes as part of my major. And in the very first exercise, the very first one, they were like, bring in a scene from a movie or TV show that like highlights good acting. Now I picked the Cersei Lannister and Robert Baratheon scene from the first season of Game of Thrones, where they're sitting across the table from each other. But in hindsight, if this had come out, I would have picked this, because this is one of the best like physical acting jobs I've ever seen in my entire life. That was a tangent, but holy fucking shit, it's so good. He's so good.
I will say the character, like he knows the character so well in the body language, because he's had to do it so much in, the whole entire character is body language. It has nothing to do with facial expression whatsoever. So the sheer fact that he can still do like the true body language, even when the mask is off, and he can still be that character. You still know it's the same guy
while undergoing the discomfort of having to take the helmet off. Like, God, it's so good.
Just as Mando gets the information he needs, he is confronted by Imperial officer Valen Hess. Mayfield interjects before Mando screws up the plan. They sit down and have a drink while Mayfield brings up the past. After a toast to the Empire, Mayfield shoots Hess with a blaster, exposing them.
We'll run through the little Easter eggs first before we get to the meat.
Okay.
Mayfield mentions Tanab. He pronounces it Tainab because Bill Burr is about as bad as we are at pronouncing things correctly. This being the site of the battle where Lando pulled off some sort of incredible maneuver that's referenced in Return of the Jedi. Mayfeld also references TPS reports. Bradley, I don't know if you'd get this reference. I had to look up specifically what movie it's from. I recognized it, but I had to check.
Okay.
It's from Office Space. It's a reference to Office Space.
Oh, was Bill Burr in that?
I don't think so. I don't know why they're referencing it.
Okay.
Bill Burr might have improvised it. Either way, it's still really funny.
Okay.
Burden Khan that's mentioned. It's been mentioned a few times. We don't know a whole lot about it. And those are my little Easter egg notes that don't spin off into something else.
Okay.
So a couple of fun little things in this scene.
So before we get into the meat of their conversation and the character of the Imperial officer, let's talk about the actor who plays him real quick. Yeah, so this actor's name is Richard Brake. Fun fact, he has been known for almost a trifecta now, because he was in he was in Mandalorian, but he was also in Thor Dark World. So he was randomly in that. So he was in a Marvel thing. So now he just needs to get a Disney thing and he's good to go. But you brought it up just a second ago, but he was also in Game of Thrones. He was in 2 episodes of Game of Thrones as the Night King.
Yes.
So,
and I specifically took a note of that one because we've talked about Game of Thrones on this show before. Yeah, he was the Night King in a couple of seasons, and that's where I know him from.
That's all really, I got on the guy, but
love this scene. I love the choice to make his accent Southern.
Yeah, he's almost like it's like I'm trying to figure out what kind of Southern it is, because it is a very particular kind of Southern.
Yes.
It's almost
it kind of reminds me of like if you watch media for the antebellum South,
yes.
Then he kind of reminds me of the kind of thing that a lot of actors would choose to do for that. So it's this kind of deep South, but like upper class deep South,
right?
Where it's closer to the original British, because the Southern accent is actually just a continuation of related to the British accent.
Right.
I just love this choice.
Yeah, it's almost because he gives you that racist, slave owner vibe. Like he's also like, it's so good.
He's very much giving us like the South will rise again kind of.
Yes, for sure.
Like it's a different kind of smug ex-asshole who's clinging on to the past.
Mm-hmm.
Like I just adore this choice.
Yeah, he's like some kind of like, he feels like he's like some kind of war hero. Like he's just been like back in the day, he just, everything he's ever done was just like spitting gold. Like he's just constantly like, he's a gem of the Empire.
You can see why this guy got left behind.
Right.
You can see why this guy got left behind. No, it's such a great smug asshole choice.
Mm-hmm.
Because it evokes a different kind of smug asshole than we're used to with the Empire. I also, I love the way he says heroes of the Empire. Like when Mayfeld challenges him and he's like, Mayfeld's like, yeah, thousands of people died. Well, they're all heroes of the Empire. You know who it reminds me of? Director Krennic in the opening of Rogue One.
Yeah, I can see that. I can see how it's like, I guess the difference between him and Krennic is that Krennic is more, I guess, genuinely like smart, I guess I would say. Like
Krennic is deploying, it's like looking at the language.
Yeah.
So we talk about the language that people use. Krennic is using it with the full knowledge of what he's doing. Krennic is manipulating Galen Erso. If you read Catalyst, you know that Krennic is a hardcore manipulator when it comes to Galen Erso. So he's trying to manipulate him when he's like, as heroes of the Empire, or whatever he says.
Whereas it's almost sarcastic.
This guy has just heard the term and is deploying it whenever he feels like it's appropriate.
Right.
I think they pronounced the name Valenhess in the episode.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to say Valen probably several times in this conversation because
that's how I would say it. I don't know why that's right, but that's
so. Not only is Valen a major character in 2 of the Old Republic expansions,
mm-hmm.
But I played a character in a series of Star Trek fan films. And I don't know shit about Star Trek, but I was living in the middle of Alabama at the time, and there were not a lot of opportunities to act on a regular basis. And I love acting. But I played a character named Lieutenant Valen, and this is how we spelled his name. So okay. I look at this name and I'm like, yes, this is me. Now, Bradley, let's talk a little bit about Operation Cinder.
Yes, let's, because Bradley did something this episode.
What did you do this episode that is a departure from everything we've done for 8 months?
So I guess I can call it research. I mean, to be fair, I didn't read anything. I didn't look up anything on Wikipedia. I just purely typed in Operation Cinder on YouTube. And the first thing that came up, or the second or third thing that came up, because, there's a couple like weird fanboy stuff explaining what it is. Then there's an actual simplified thing that I liked much better, which was just all the cutscenes from Battlefront 2 put together of what Operation Cinder is.
There's a bunch of fans explaining things, and also Alex Damon explaining things in a good, simple way. So I know Alex Damon, Star Wars Explained, does have a video on Operation Cinder.
Maybe I'll watch that one too.
Yeah, he's really good at. There's a reason I keep bringing him up on the show, because him and Molly, his wife, are really good at putting out content that's very accessible. But yes, Bradley has actually now visually seen what Operation Cinder looks like.
Yeah, because the way it was explained to me, I think you kind of slightly explained it a couple episodes ago, just not to like ruin this moment here, but you did kind of explain it a little bit. I think I didn't really quite understand it until I watched the video, and there are some really cool things, by the way, in that little cutscene.
So for the uninitiated, Operation Cinder actually originated in the comic Shattered Empire, and the Battlefront 2 story campaign is almost kind of an adaptation or like a side story of Shattered Empire, because a lot of what happens in Shattered Empire forms a lot of the early plot of Battlefront 2. Shattered Empire I have read, and both of us have seen Battlefront 2. So the way it worked is that the Empire had these like climate control satellites, and their thing is that they were meant to disrupt the climate and basically scorched earth the planet. Like they would kill everyone on it due to this like extreme climate disruption. They successfully pulled it off a few places. They tried it on Naboo, but it didn't work. They were able to save Naboo. But yes, that is what this is. But I think the episode also does a really good job of conveying, just from the name and the death toll, how horrifying Operation Cinder actually was. And the thing is, Valen Hess says, here's a guy who knows his history. When I first watched this episode, I was like, dude, Operation Cinder was like last week. Then I checked it. No, Operation Cinder was basically right after the events of Return of the Jedi. So it was 8 to 9 years ago. Hess isn't probably used to dealing with people who've been in the Empire for that long.
Right, because they cycle through it really quickly at this point.
Somebody brings up Operation Cinder. And like the way they're clearly spinning it is these people were sacrifices for the Empire. Mm-hmm. But yes, Bradley, what did you think of this sequence now, knowing like when you watched it originally versus when you watched it now, having visually seen what Operation Cinder does to a planet?
So it definitely makes it much more extreme. I think they really did. I think this scene in particular actually does almost a better job than the cutscene does of just like conveying how bad it was. Because I think like, in video games, it can kind of get a little lost if you're not playing the video game. Like just the cutscenes alone are not necessarily like going to do it justice. So I think, I can't get the full effect from just the cutscenes, but at least I got to visually see kind of some of it. But especially with Mayfield, how the tension of this scene is slowly rising from the beginning of their conversation, where he's kind of like pretending to compliment him, to kind of like slowly but surely like resenting him by the end of the conversation and boiling to the point of killing him. That to me is much more impactful and explaining of how bad this was.
Because Mayfeld is the one that brings it up. Mayfeld is the one that brings it up. And Did is looking over at him like, don't do this.
Yeah, he's like, you're pushing it,
talking
dude.
about this. Yeah, for me, like the minute they brought it up, because I had played Battlefront 2, and at the time I hadn't read Shattered Empire. I have now. When they brought it up, I was like, oh, this explains why Mayfeld deserted, like in 2 words. The minute he brings this up. I have 2 more notes for this sequence, and then I promise we'll move on. 2.5 notes for this sequence. I want to talk about the rise of the First Order. Because
that line, yes.
Hess says, he talks about how people want stability, and in the end, they're going to come back to us. They want order, and they will come back to us. He specifically says
order.
They will come back to order, or something like that. To which I'm like, First, he accurately predicts what is going to happen. And if you watch the first season of Star Wars Resistance, which, Bradley, I know that you've not done that because you have no taste.
I think I finished the first season. I couldn't finish the second season, I think.
So if you watch the first season in back to back, which is my recommended way of doing it, and you really can see how their plan is use the pirates to destabilize the Colossus so that the First Order can come in and provide quote unquote security to the platform. That's how they managed to do it. So I find Hess's line extremely interesting in this scene where he accurately predicts that's how the First Order is going to do it. My other 1.5 notes. I want to bring up just how fucking proper Hitchcock this scene is. Like Hitchcock, in terms of the suspense of it, it's a very like the bomb under the table scene. You know what it reminded me of? It wasn't a Hitchcock film, but you know what this reminded me of?
What?
Was, have you seen Inglourious Bastards?
No.
There's a scene from Inglourious Bastards. It's about 10 minutes long, 15 minutes long, of them, like the British spies sitting at a table with the German officers and talking. And it's this very intense scene. This reminds me of that. So if you haven't seen it, it's very difficult to explain. But for people who have seen it, this is what that reminds me of. My final note on this sequence, and we're blasting through to the end, the bit where Mayfeld like hands him the helmet back and says, you did what you had to do, and then turns his head away.
Right.
So that he's not looking at Mando any more than he absolutely has to. That was a powerful moment for me.
Yeah, it was almost like he was trying to be respectful of Mando's predicament. Like he doesn't understand the rules, and he thinks Mando is being like wishy-washy with the rules, but he also is trying to respect his rules. Like he's like, I'm not gonna look at your face. Like I know I saw it, but like I'll just pretend like I never saw it. Like it's not a big deal.
It's almost kind of like now that you have actually done this and demonstrated how difficult this is for you, I'm going to ease off a little bit.
Right.
Because when it's in the abstract and Mando would never do it, Mayfeld's perfectly fine mocking him and bullying him about it. Then when Mando demonstrates exactly what it means for him to have to do it, Mayfeld's like, okay, I kind of understand how uncomfortable this is for you. I'm going to be more respectful of it. It's great character development.
With the help of the Mando crew, the pair are able to escape from the base, but not before Mayfeld blows up the refinery with a single shot. TIE fighters come after the crew on Boba's fire spray class ship, but he is ready for them as he releases seismic charges from the prequel movies that make the best sound ever and destroy the TIE fighters.
So the interesting thing about the rifle that Mayfeld uses to blow up the Rhidonium, it's a Tusken Raider rifle. It's Boba Fett's Tusken Raider rifle that we see all the way back in season 2, episode 1.
Nice.
Here's the thing about it. It fires real bullets.
Oh.
If you listen carefully to the sound effect,
yeah,
that's not a laser.
Oh,
That's an
interesting.
actual gunshot that he's firing.
Huh. That kind of makes a little more sense then, because like I think with the blaster rifles, when they use lasers or whatever, I think that if from that distance, maybe that wouldn't have been remotely as
As
effective.
effective.
Right.
No,
As a
he hits
physical
that thing.
object. Yeah.
He hits that thing with a bullet,
Wow. Okay.
which he was a sharpshooter. So
Yeah. And I like how Fennec and Kara are both like, huh, nice job. Nice shot. Like, this is a good one. Like, I like
nice.
that.
Nice. I mean, either of us could have done that.
Yeah, they're like, we
Which
could have done that. Yeah.
which I it almost felt a little inconsistent to me. So Kara's shooting like a sniper,
Mm-hmm.
but her role in the rebellion was she was a drop trooper. So I'm kind of wondering what her training was that she's able to do this sniping, because sniping from this far away is a very specific skill set.
Right.
So that was just a minor thing that I had when I was watching it. I was like, wait, isn't she a drop trooper?
Yeah.
Like, isn't her whole thing like shock and awe? Like, how maybe she had more training or practiced on her own that we don't know about, but
right.
Probably it might have been explained later. It never will be, so I'm not going to bother with it. Last note I have for this scene is the sonic mine. I love the sonic mine.
I absolutely. When I tell you that when that happened the first time I saw this, I almost peed my pants because I love two things. One, I think that scene from Attack of the Clones is so cool when he does that with the charges when what is it? Obi-Wan Kenobi's chasing Jango in his ship. The sound that the charges make when they're silent for like 1 second and then they make that like boom sound. Oh, this is like sound design, like just excellent quality.
It's fan service, but it's fan service is pandering to our generation specifically, which I'm A-okay with. My bias is showing here.
Next up, the team reconvene and comment on the fact that it was a shame Mayfield died during the incursion on the refinery. He walks away a free man, and the Slave One departs the planet in pursuit of the finale episode.
Yeah, so I'm curious whether or not Mayfield will be back for the next season, because his story ends pretty conclusively here. Mm-hmm. If you need it to. If you need this to be the ending for Mayfield, it's a pretty good one.
That's pretty solid. I mean, the only thing I thought about was, which I hate when they do this in Star Wars, is that why do they do this thing where they abandon people on a fucking planet? Like, I don't understand, like, with no way to get off, right? Like, so it's almost like as if you were to travel to another country with like your friend and then be like, well, you're free, go on, live your life. And then like you leave the planet or you leave the country in the only plane available and they have no money and no job and no passport. And so it's like, all right, you're a new person now. Go live your life.
They do this a lot where they just like drop people on random planets and are like, go nuts. That's what they do to Rey.
Right.
They just kind of, they sell her to Unkar Plutt and they're like, go nuts. We'll be back. And then they're not.
Right.
The only thing like this would be my headcanon if he doesn't show up. I like the idea that Mayfeld, the character, because he talks about, we see the villagers midway through the episode. I like the idea that he might go back and like try to help them rebuild since the refinery is gone. Like maybe if we see him in season 3, we'll see him like in that context. But also if we don't see him back in season 3, his story is, this is a pretty decent conclusion for it. He's gotten out of his system what he needed to get out of his system. His arc as a character can basically be said to be done here.
Yeah, and you could also argue too that he's kind of, he's atoned for his sins essentially, right?
Right.
Because his last final act, before he was leaving this, planet was to blow up the refinery so that I was going to say the coaxium,
whatever bullshit
whatever
of the week we're going to be using for our plot.
Right. His final act was to blow that up so it couldn't be used against anybody else. So the Empire had no use for it. I just thought that was nice. In a last, almost end credit-like scene, we see Moff Gideon board his cruiser with a FaceTime voicemail from the Mandalorian informing Gideon that he messed with the wrong daddy.
Yeah, your millennial is showing. Or are you? You're a millennial, right? Are you millennial or Gen Z?
No, I'm millennial.
You're millennial. Your millennial is showing. It's a Skype call. That's called a Skype call.
Oh my god.
That was a shout out to what was it? One of the Bad Batch episodes. Yeah, you got on my case. So I feel like I have to point out that is a Skype call.
Right.
Or a Zoom call, or God, we have so many voice calls now. Yeah, it's the same speech from season 1 that Mando gives. I didn't catch that the first time I watched it.
Mm-hmm.
But going back, I'm like, oh yeah, that is basically the same speech with minor alterations.
Does Moff say that when he's like stepping out or something? I feel like
Moff Gideon.
Yeah.
When he steps out in episode,
like when his TIE fighter lands, I think, and then he comes out.
TIE fighter lands,
and he's doing his speech. They're hiding in the bar, and he's like, kind of. I think that's what he said.
Yeah,
that's
it's the same speech. You have something I want.
Mm-hmm.
You may have some idea. You may think you have some idea what you're in possession of, but you do not. He means more to me than you could possibly know. Right. It's the same speech that he gives.
Gotcha. That's a nice touch.
I just love Gideon's face during this whole scene.
Yeah, it's almost like annoyed, but also like not worried, because I don't feel that
it's annoyed, but also kind of impressed.
Yeah, he's kind of like, oh, using my own words against me. I see how it is.
Game respect game. I see what you're doing here.
Right.
Giancarlo Esposito is supposed to be in more of season 3 than he has been in previous seasons, which is excellent. I will be delighted to see more of him, because he is such an asshole. Just such a smug asshole in this series. And I love him. He is wonderful. His face journey as Mando speaking is just note perfect.
Of course.
I have a fun fact to close out before we go into some of the production stuff. I didn't notice this. A source had to point this out to me that I was reading. But this is the first episode of The Mandalorian, and the only episode of The Mandalorian to not have Grogu in it.
Oh,
Grogu does not appear on screen a single time in this episode.
But he's in every other episode.
He's in every other episode.
Huh. You kind of wonder why they wouldn't have just done like a quick, like him in prison kind of sitting there crying or something. You know what I mean? Like, just throw it in there.
Yeah, no, it's the first one he's not in.
Huh.
True story. Yeah, so now that I've ruined your day, let's talk. We made it all the way to the end of the episode without mentioning who wrote and directed the episode.
Good. Finally.
We stayed on format this time. Bradley, who wrote and directed this episode?
Okay. Again, here we go, trying to pronounce things that we don't know how to pronounce. It was written and directed by Rick Famuyiwa.
Famuyiwa, I think, is how you pronounce it.
Famuyiwa.
Okay. Famuyiwa is how you pronounce the last name.
Gotcha.
But what is notable about Rick Famuyiwa?
Well, he directed and wrote the Prisoner episode back in season 1, which directly has our Migs Mayfield character in it. So that's a little fun fact. Funny enough, he also directed episode 2 of the season 1, which is The Child. And I have one last fun fact about him. He actually has the most directing credits on The Mandalorian besides Dave, and he has the most writing credits besides John. So it's a weird, like...
Does Dave have more directing credits than John?
Yes.
How many directing credits does John have? Because I thought...
you know what? I didn't look up their specific like numbers. I just said that because John has the most out of anybody for writing. And then Dave has technically the most for directing. So it's just
Dave
like
Dave directed 1 episode of season 1 and 2 episodes of season 2. He directed The Marshal and the Jedi.
Right.
Oh,
so I
was
just trying to like exclude them from like the number count, because I don't count John and I don't count Dave is like in the most, because they're basically showrunners. They don't count for me.
Yes.
So anybody
Rick,
extra
of the non-showrunners, yes,
right.
Rick has the most.
He has the most, right? So that's just
that
a fun
is
fact.
a fun fact.
Yeah. Which I thought was interesting, and then I think next is Deborah. She's Deborah Chow.
Deborah Chow
after that. So.
Although in terms of directing Star Wars episodes, excluding Dave, Deborah's about to blow all of these other people out of the water, because she's directing all 6 episodes of Kenobi, which, oh boy.
Right. Which is great.
That is dedication right there.
It'll feel like a movie because of that. She's
like directing a 6-hour, 7-hour movie.
Yeah, that's what it kind of is going to be like.
Did she even direct anything this season?
No, I don't think so.
No, I think she might have been working on Kenobi.
I think she was. Yeah, I think she was in pre-pro when they were doing season 2 production.
And season 2.
Where do you rank this on your list?
Yes, we have to do the obligatory ranking. So I think number 1 is going to be still the Jedi.
Same.
Number 2, the Heiress.
Same.
Number 3, the Marshal.
Same.
Then I would say the Tragedy.
Okay.
Then I would say the Believer. Then I would say the Passenger. Then I would say the Siege.
Okay, so I think based on my
have we changed?
This one,
have
I
we
think
finally
we finally split
where we didn't rank them quite 100% the same?
I think I like this one more than I like the Tragedy.
Really?
Yeah, even though the Tragedy has some of the best Fennec Shan stuff in it, I don't know. I think just because of all of the character stuff in this one, I think I hold character development over action sequence. And whereas this one has really good action sequence, it has the character development, whereas the Tragedy doesn't have both.
What put it over for me is, like, if you had asked me to rank them before we did these in-depth rewatches, I would have probably had the same ranking as you.
Yeah.
But the Boba Fett character development and the way he's handled in the Tragedy and the way they establish what his character is going to be going forward put it just above the Believer for me. And also the action sequences and the way that showed off the characterization, like the bit where Mando like flips around to deflect the bolt so Fennec can like escape and move to a better position. Like all that just puts it slightly above the Believer for me. They're super close.
Nice.
But yes, 7 episodes into this show, we have finally got a difference of
finally split. Okay.
Although I feel like we're going to be wildly different in the finale.
I don't know how to feel about the finale yet. I mean, I haven't rewatched it yet as of this point for even remotely commenting on it, but I don't know, because I don't know if you can give it the Rogue One treatment and be like, well, this part, there's parts of it that are so good that you have to put it up there, but then there's also like, obviously it's just a basic ass, fucking episode. So it's hard to say.
Our guest for next week had a very different reaction to it than I did. Okay. And so I am very excited to get them on to talk about their perspective. And that is all I am going to say about next week's episode.
Great. Okay. Well, good. That's a good teaser for the season finale for sure.
That's a good teaser there's our little our Moff Gideon stinger. We've got a very exciting guest next week.
Awesome. Well, is there any final thoughts you have?
I do not have any final thoughts. We can end this fucking episode.
Oh, okay. Well, until next time. Thank you for listening to Gold Squadron Gaze.
Did we forget something? Email us at goldsquadrongaze@gmail.com. You can follow us on Twitter at goldsquadgaze, and you can follow us on Instagram and TikTok at Gold Squadron Gaze. Subscribe to us on YouTube at Gold Squadron Gaze, where we post this podcast as well as exclusive video content.
Please join us next week and every week for another episode of Gold Squadron Gaze.
Turn off my notifications. We definitely do not need my grinder going off in the middle of recording, as on brand as that would be.
Right.